And good evening, everybody. The polls have closed in Colorado. We are here on Denver7 Plus for the next half hour. We're going to break down the results, the voter turnout, take you inside the numbers. I'm Tony Kovaleski with Natalie Chuck and Alton Dillard. Exciting time. Everybody's voted. The decisions are in. Now we get to count the results.
Yeah.
Give me your insight, Natalie, on what you're expecting as we work through this next half hour.
Well, as we broke down earlier in the evening, obviously, Tony, kind of low voter turnout this year like we expected. But we first want to introduce you to our in-house political expert here with us, Alton Dillard. You are a wealth of knowledge for us to reach over to and pick your brain tonight. So first, introduce yourself to everyone. Give us a little bit of a background as to who you are, how you ended up here with us tonight.
Okay, well, I had a 17-year career managing communications for the Denver County Clerk and Recorder's Office, and prior to that, I worked on the press staff of former United States Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell. I was with him for all 12 years when he was a Democrat, when he was a Republican. I told people I belonged to the party of Benjamin Franklin, so as long as my bills were still getting paid, I wasn't tripping on the party switch.
Great, and we have you here tonight, obviously breaking down a few different ballot measures for us, everything going on statewide, locally here in Denver. And Tony, you spent a lot of this evening breaking down that voter turnout that we saw.
Well, and I think that opens our discussion, right? Because you look at the voter turnout in Denver and those numbers, and then statewide, and it's not good. The Denver number, about 22%. This was as of earlier today. 75, almost 76% ballots not cast. Now, traditionally, Alton, and you know this, Denver voters show up late, right? Early on, we saw those numbers of turnout. You can see up on the screen right now how many turned out Monday, Sunday over the weekend, and they're expecting a big turnout today. Typically, that last day turnout is Denver's progressive voters waiting. The early vote tends to be 65 plus. What was your takeaway from those turnouts in Denver?
Well, one of my takeaways is that usually by the time all said and done and the ballots are counted, you usually see about a 10% spike, both in the state numbers and in the city numbers. And you're 100% correct, Tony. You're going to start seeing that big push. I actually take exercise classes at the Cook Park Recreation Center in South Denver, and there were steady drive up to the 24-hour box located outside that box today.
I think you brought up an important point earlier when we were all speaking together kind of behind the scenes, is just how important it is for people to show up and vote. Obviously, this is not a big presidential year. Not many people might even know we were having an election here in Colorado or Denver. So talk to us a little bit about that. You were saying it's just so important to remind people why they need to get out there and make their voices heard during any election. Yes,
one of the things I always like to say is the number 437. That was the number of votes in Bush v. Gore in Florida 2000. So your vote does matter, your vote does count. And see, people fought and died for the right to be able to vote. And I've always been of the school of thought that, yes, it's important to get excited about who your governor is going to be, who your president's going to be, who your congresspeople are going to be. But why would you sit out an election where the policies that dictate how your children are educated or everyone else's children, why would you sit that out? Why would you not want to chime in on whether you do or don't want to see improvements to your city as far as it comes to the infrastructure?
Well, and I'd love your insight. The 23% number for Denver, expecting it to grow. Here are the 430 numbers, 430 this afternoon numbers of statewide turnout, and we see 31% of the 4,100,000 registered voters had cast ballots as of 4:30 this afternoon. 69% sitting on the sideline. And you've got issues of kids and meals. You've got a chance in your local communities to vote. What does that number say?
Well, one of the things that number says to me is that you always have to keep in mind also when it comes to a ballot what the questions driving turnout are. So I did a quick comparison to the last coordinated election, which would have been 2021, and there were 3 statewide issues, I believe, but nothing that was hugely sexy. And so
Impacting your pocketbook,
impacting-
getting you to open up that envelope and
Yes.
cast the ballot, right?
Yes, and you would think that, you know, people would do that. So again, I'm not a prognosticator per se, but I would say by the time all's said and done, the numbers both at the state level and in Denver will probably be close to where they were in 2021.
And what are some of those measures that you think would be driving any voters out this go round? What are the storylines that you're really keeping an eye on and you think that people are interested in?
You know what? I think there's definitely the school lunch thing, of course. That's the statewide question. But so many localities and municipalities are voting on everything from school boards to fire districts, probably to sanitation districts, to lodging taxes. There's just so much going on. And again, I'm a big fan of if you are at that hyper-local level, that's why it's more important to have your voice heard in these quote-unquote off-year elections.
Got some breaking news. I'm watching the Denver numbers coming in. We're watching those 5 bond numbers, and I guess this is the first drop at 7 o'clock. All 5 of them passing by significant numbers right now.
For that Vibrant Denver bond.
Vibrant Denver, and there were some people that were saying maybe voters would only go 3 and 2. Looking at those early numbers just online right now, all 5 are passing, let's see, 59, 60% on 2A, 63% on 2B, 66% on 2C, 61% on 2D, and 62% on 2E. I'm trying to get a percentage of the vote that's in right now. 91,000 votes, but that's an early sign, right? And we said the early vote tends to be 65 up.
Yes.
Alton, what's your reaction to what those numbers say?
So a couple of things. The early read on that is that, yes, the 65 and ups have turned out. Those are some pretty big margins. And so I think that the people over at the Vibrant Denver Bond are going to be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. But also remember that there could be, and I'm just going off the top of my head with a number, there could be another 200,000 ballots getting dropped over the course of this evening into the counting process. So what you're seeing, these are essentially quote unquote early vote numbers. These are all the ballots that got downtown before today, because usually Denver elections, from what I recall, would make sure they were zeroed going into election night so they had room for the always Denver last minute walk-up vote.
Which your point is valid, that it can change, but if you're on that Vibrant Denver side, I know we've got a live camera there, and I'm hoping we can get to it sometime soon here, but I'm guessing they have to be ecstatic with the early numbers because they're not having to play catch up right now.
Right, and again, you know, these are some pretty big margins, because one thing I always tell people from my time there, the thing with how Denver is geographically set up, some of the last ballots they're going to get downtown are going to be from the far southwest and the far northeast parts of the city. And so usually when we were looking at results, just as folks who worked in elections, margins actually had a tendency to spread. But as we get further into some of the other matters that are down ballot, the later turnout may factor in.
And give us a little bit of perspective here, because we were saying earlier what a big moment this will be for Mayor Mike Johnston. He's obviously been a massive proponent of this Vibrant Denver bond, so this is really a win for him tonight if this does hold true.
Yeah, if this holds up, yeah, it would be a big win. And the other thing is think about this, and again, I always tell people, I majored in communications, not poli-sci, but Mayor Johnston essentially pushed all his chips to the center halfway through his first term as mayor.
I love poker analogies. Keep going. Yeah.
Tony got excited for that one. Yeah.
So, you know, because there was, you know, talk whether this was going to be a referendum on, you know, some of the concerns that people have about his leadership style, etc. But one of the things that also we always have to remember is that when it comes to being an elected official, if you're not hacking off people on both sides of an issue or both sides of an ideology, you may not be doing it right. And so even though there's not a political analogy, I do see a lot of Johnston in that almost startup culture. always like to say that his two predecessors, being Hickenlooper and Hancock, ran government more like a business. I see him running it more as a startup, where perhaps he may think it's his duty to break systems and try to do it a better way.
We also have numbers from the Secretary of State's office right now that I want to share with you. We told you earlier 1.2 million ballots had been cast as of 4:30. Numbers have dropped here, and both LL and MM are passing by significant numbers. Yes for LL is at 70.64%. MM is at 64% yes. That's with 150,000 of the 1.2 million ballots counted. We told you 1.2 had been cast early. So again, a very optimistic start for these two statewide measures.
Yeah, Colorado making it really clear, right, that they're showing up for kids, and this rhetoric is working about wanting to ensure that students have these meals, have access to these meals. What's your initial take on that, on how Colorado's voting for these two propositions?
Well, on that one, I think it's pretty simple, because you're talking about feeding kids. And as I always like to say, the devil's in the detail and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And again, think in terms of this as being an extension and a continuation of healthy meals for all kids. Again, this is not just saying let's shore up the low-income students. This is saying let's shore up all students. And I coach high school basketball. And so the things that 15, 16, 17-year-old kids in particular put in their bodies is pretty amazing. Like, it was with my basketball team when I saw my first ever walking taco. I had no idea what a walking taco was until I saw a kid with a bag of nacho cheese Doritos, extra nacho cheese from the concession stand, jalapeno, and a fork. And that was a meal.
Yeah, and you can see those numbers on your screen. We just had them up there. But Proposition MM, voting for that tax increase, for that income tax increase for people making more than $300,000, those households. What does that say about the people who showed up at the polls today?
You know, one of the things that it says is that, because I think and don't quote me on this, but I think the tax rate was going to be like another, what, 425 or so bucks on those affected households. And we were talking about that number of 300,000. That will get you to maybe a middle income bracket as far as how it costs to live in Colorado these days. So none of the results so far have been anything surprising.
I talked to insiders, Alton, about the way that ballot read and the graphic in there that specifically made it clear that this is people with $300,000 or more, obviously a minority of the people who live in the state. What kind of impact do you think that had? I talked to one insider who said it was brilliant because it was easy to follow when you got your ballot and say, well, I'm not one of those. This isn't going to cost me anything. Sure, I'll vote yes. What's your thought?
Yeah, I like that analogy. And then the other part to consider there is that, again, it's that key core message of feeding kids. There are people like us who like to dive into the legislative minutia and the wherefores and the there ises and all that. But if you keep your message simple and high level, that usually is what resonates with voters. And I've seen a lot of campaigns get in their own way by being overly explanatory as opposed to just sticking to whatever their key message is.
And another thought, I mean, obviously this is all landing during this government shutdown where SNAP benefits are a conversation and a concern for people. You have to wonder, is that top of mind for people today when they're going to vote and seeing these benefits being stripped away at a time when people are hungry and looking for other resources?
Yes, because with MM, there's also mention of that even before the shutdown, of course, of that being a bit of a shore up.
Right.
Because LL is just simply, under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, you have to go back to the voters to be able to retain excess revenue. And that's why there's a bit of an interlock between those two questions. And so I'm thinking with keeping kids fed being at the forefront, and the government shutdown's gone on long enough that it may have been, I'm sure it was going on back when ballots first dropped. And so I just think that This is another example of Colorado, and this is not the only issue. Colorado has a tendency to get out on the forefront of keeping Coloradans protected, whether it be putting extra codification for same-sex marriage into law, or coming up with another like voters' bill of rights because of some of the things that are going on federally. One thing with Colorado, and some call it the purple politics, they do have a tendency to get on the front edge of the wave as opposed to just being reactive.
Well, and getting inside those numbers again about voter turnout, right? As of 4:30, 69% of people throughout the state said, I didn't have enough time, didn't have enough reason to go vote. In Denver, it was about 76%. And we know historically that there's a couple reasons you decide. There are those people that vote all the time, a solid base, right?
Yep.
Like all of us. But then there's either a reason you go to vote because there's something you really don't want to pass, and I've got to make sure that this doesn't happen, or something you're really passionate about. And this ballot right now, just based upon early returns, didn't really hit either of those buttons. Fair?
Yeah, it was kind of down the middle, but when it comes to the terminology of quote-unquote going to vote, Colorado pretty much has the easiest voting model in the country. And that's one of the reasons that I get so flamed up when people do not participate in every election. When I was still with the elections office, I went and looked up my own voter registration record just to make sure that I was walking the talk. And because my demographic being one of the last ones to earn the right to vote in this country, I even voted absentee in college. It was just part of the muscle memory in my family. You vote, whether you think something, quote, affects you or not. But that's part of, I think, one of the things as we talk about heading into this 2026 cycle, we're falling into this thing where if there's no direct effect on me, just let the chips fall where they may. And I'm hoping that we just as an overall society start paying a little more attention to what affects us and our neighbors.
And we've talked about this before, but how have you really noticed that change this day and age with social media, with all of the conversations online? We're constantly hearing sort of like a loneliness crisis where people are just in their phones and not out engaging in their community. How have you noticed the shift when it comes to people showing up at the polls, people having conversations about these off-year elections?
Ooh, because one of the things with the showing up piece, and to your point about the conversations, they're becoming so few and far between. So even in these local elections, which I like to call wink wink nonpartisan, there's a polarization that's happening. And see, I came up in a political era where you were able to still discuss matters with people who you may not necessarily agree with, but it wasn't a matter of trying to win them over to your side. It was just a matter of trying to see what made them tick.
You have a right to your position, right?
Yes.
There's not a right or a wrong. This is what I believe.
This is what I believe, yes.
That was then.
Yeah, that was definitely then. And so one of the things that you're seeing now, again, people will stake out their flag on either side of an issue, so you're starting to see trickle down. Think of in terms even of some of the school board races that are going on in the metro and even outside the metro area. And then you think about, okay, wait a minute, now this one may be becoming a referendum on which books can be in which libraries, or what kind of restrooms can be in a certain school. And that is one of the things that I'm seeing from the right, because the right is really struggling to get a statewide foothold. So you're seeing more and more people who are affiliated with the Republican Party starting to run for school boards and town councils, trying to get some kind of foothold to be able to continue to move their agenda, since it's not going to happen at the state level trickling down.
And it does look like we're starting to see those Denver school board election results trickle in that first dump. Again, what were you looking at when it came to who would be elected to the school board positions? Because we were discussing earlier, they're going to inherit a conversation when it comes to Denver Public Schools budget concerns, school closures. That's kind of the topic everyone's been talking about, and school safety in public schools. So what are you keeping an eye on when it comes to who's coming out on top here?
All right, what I'm keeping an eye out, and I'm concentrating mainly on the safety issue. And so that is one of those things that we talked about, is I think a bit of a referendum on, you know, what's going on. And there's also a whole belief that, you know, even with this current board, what is the level of holding the superintendent accountable? The superintendent of schools reports to the board, not vice versa, but you would not know that following the headlines. And so there's a lot of people saying, well, these people are union backed, or these people are reformers, these people are traditionalists. But there is a cadre of people that formed after the shootings at East High School who said, all that other stuff is secondary. What are we going to do about having armed students in our classes?
Right. It's top of mind for people, right? And obviously coming off of Evergreen, a
Yes.
different district, but
Well, and the headlines at East High School, remember that those armed individuals, or individuals that, students that were concerned to be armed and had to be searched, were being searched by teachers and school employees who were not armed, in harm's way. My son-in-law is in the education. I can't imagine having to be put in that position where if you find a student with a weapon, you're now outmatched.
Yes.
And then a lot of people are outraged about that.
Yes, and the outrage is kind of sustained, because that's one of the things that, even, you know, touching briefly on what's going on nationally, is with our, what I call 180 character attention span as a society, who's capable of sustaining the outrage? But I just think that that was a big tipping point, because especially when it comes to the Denver public schools, I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are like, well, why is this even a discussion point? Of having, you know, someone in a school where being frisked is a condition of their attendance. And that's where my libertarian brain kind of kicks in a little bit, is does the 1% get to affect the education of the other 99?
and something that voters are taking into consideration when they're deciding who's going to make decisions that impact their students that potentially go to DPS. Also keeping an eye on this dump, City Council out in Aurora, looks like Danielle Jurinsky is taking home the majority of those votes for that one of those at-large positions. Your initial reaction to that?
That's pretty much expected, because one of the things that's going on there with Aurora, and again, it's a sort of a fascinating case study, because Aurora is the most diverse city in Colorado. There's no two ways about that. But people are saying, well, how did it end up with such a conservative bent? And so, you know, who the standard bearer is Mayor Mike Kaufman. So even though it is a city manager form of government there, when Kaufman, any elected office that he was in the community shaking the hands. He was with the Ethiopians, the Eritreans, the Hmongs, the Laotians.
We can see the numbers up there right now as we're talking about them. But yeah, there's that at-large race.
And then also back to Jurinsky, remember when everyone said that she was being overblown when she raised concerns about the presence of Tren de Aragua? So perhaps they didn't take over the whole city, but that was a case where there was some smoke, there was some fire.
She was out on the forefront of that.
Right.
The DEA put out a press release early on that created mayors coming out saying it wasn't true. There was some extensions of where was the truth on that statement, but saying they weren't here at all, as we now know, was not true.
And she's essentially become a household name. We were having this discussion earlier, but she's been all over the country when it comes to, you can click on any news channel. She's out there having conversations. She's on social media. She was getting her message out there. So definitely a name that if you're just scanning that ballot, you go, oh, I know who that is if you're in Aurora.
Yeah, and that's a name recognition. And then the other part of this is those numbers that you saw that came across, those are much closer. So that is going to bear watching
close.
based on which wards are still going to be
Right.
having numbers coming in. But look at all these.
Those
These
are
all-
early numbers. Really, there's only 200 or 200 votes between the fourth place and Danielle in the first
Right.
place spot.
Yes.
Obviously, early numbers, but if you're a candidate, you want to start fast and not play catch up. So those are positive for Danielle, but we got a long way to go.
Long way to go there. Yes.
And I know we only have so much time here. We could talk all night long, but I do want to get to referendum 310 here in Denver. That is a big one people are talking about, right? And expensive. Looks like most people voting yes to retain that decision to not have these flavored tobacco products in Denver. Interesting, you were talking to me earlier about how confusing this one could be for voters. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, and part of this is, again, just me being a nerd. But a referendum is to overturn a governmental action. But so some people may have been confused that a yes vote was to retain a governmental action. And one of the things we were talking about off camera was...
And while you keep explaining it, we are looking live now at the No on 310 watch party so that people are gathering around, seeing some of these early numbers. I interrupted you. Keep explaining because I think people need to understand that perspective.
Right.
Yeah, and so just, again, a referendum is usually something that overturns a government action. And so one of the things I think has gotten sort of lost in the wash was this had already been essentially on the books, but Mayor Hancock vetoed it. And so that's one of the reasons why it sort of pushed back into another election cycle. So again, the concerns on both sides, the yes folks are talking about the concerns of flavored tobacco, its effect on kids, flavored tobacco's effect in communities of color. The no folks, who are a grassroots band of vape shop owners, gas station owners, head shop owners, people who play in that space, but they got greatly outspent. So, I'm not in the business of quote unquote calling races, but that's a wrap.
Money talking here, right?
I mean, you talk about being greatly outspent. Just elaborate for people who don't know about exactly how much money was injected into this campaign.
One of the last injections came from former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and that pushed his giving somewhere in between $4 to $5 million in an off-year local ballot issue.
Right.
And so of course, they were playing the opponents of the ban were playing these New York City billionaires are coming into Denver trying to tell us what to do and put us out of business. But one of the things on the pro side, because of all the money they had, they were up on TV early, and they were
often.
And they were up so early. There were some people who were speculating maybe they hopped out too early, just based on the saturation. But then once you start seeing the amount of money that came in, that's why they were able to sustain as long as they did. I did see some from the No campaign. I did see some social ads, and but one of the things also is that there's still, believe it or not, like me, there's still a lot of analog people running around. Not everyone gets their information by social media, and let me caveat, thank goodness.
Well, and we were talking earlier about the numbers, right? And there's 2023 data that shows 16% of Colorado high school students currently vape. That number was down. It used to be around 30%, but that's still a large number. And then it showed that youth vaping rates in Colorado have fallen from peak years that were almost at 26%. So numbers are down, but that's still a concerning number. And when you're talking about an item that there's still questions about their healthiness or lack of health issues and concerns about what's actually in that chemical, you can see why they played the doctors in the commercials and sent that message strong. And so far, voters in Colorado were saying, hey, we heard your message.
Yeah, they're definitely hearing the message. And then the other thing to keep in mind, and this is fact, you can go through what my old boss, Paul Lopez, Denver County Clerk and Recorder, referred to as the inverted L. And that's where you're going to see the proliferation of these types of shops. They're going to come down Federal, hang a right on I-70, and head out into Montbello and Green Valley Ranch, going through Elyria, Swansea. And so I think that, making both the geographic argument and then the fact that they consider flavored tobacco to be a point of entry,
The socioeconomic impact, right? And the socioeconomic target.
Yes, definitely a socioeconomic target, and then also, you know, just when you look at the names of some of the flavors, you know, they're not marketing things, you know, called tricks or peanut butter
Rainbow
crunch to us.
sherbet, peppermint, blue raz ice. Come on now.
Yes.
And talk about something that's going to get people out to vote, right? I mean, this is one of those measures that has an immediate impact, essentially. We are going to see businesses, they've told us and our reporters, leave Denver because they still want to sell these products. So they're just going to go outside of the city. And then you are going to see people who still want those products leave. So what sort of impacts do you anticipate that we see here?
Well, there is going to be a fiscal impact, you know, from a sales tax perspective. But, you know, hopefully, and this is something that I saw floating around like on social media today, hopefully some of the business owners are creative enough to be able to create some kind of backfill. And it's sort of a perfect storm because the state's in a budgetary pinch, the city and county of Denver's in a budgetary pinch, so this may not be the best timing for this measure, but, you know, this is, looking at that margin, this is definitely one where at least the early voters have spoken.
Well, let's take a moment and talk about we got the 7 p.m. numbers out of Denver and out of the state. There'll be an update again at 8 o'clock. That will be very telling. We're going to have updates on all the platforms of Denver7, Denver7.com, Denver7 Plus, and of course we'll have coverage tonight at 10 o'clock. So a lot of opportunities, and you can go to the Secretary of State's website if you're a real political nerd like the three of us and want to see what's happening at 8 o'clock, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Denver7 has ongoing coverage online all night long. Our reporters are out there hard at work to bring you any up-to-date information and new numbers.
And then remember, the Denver dumps are on 90-minute increments, so look at 8:30,
8:30, right.
And then look right before we hit again at 10.
Yeah, incredible. And thank you so much for being here with us 30 minutes straight, nonstop, just yapping away.
You made us smarter, my friend.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. And thank you all for watching tonight.
Look at you guys.
We had fun.
That was great.
How fun.
Brought me back to my car.